Hi, my name is Madge Evers, and I'm here today to talk to you about my life as an artist and to show you the cyanotype process so you can make your own art with that. People create all kinds of things in this world. I'm thinking about cooking food or writing notes in the form of a letter or a text. People put together outfits and they compose videos. People use their voices to sing songs. People write poems and they doodle in the margins of their notebooks. They arrange the furniture in their rooms or make curtains for their windows. And people build houses. The list goes on and on as to things that people make. And I think that all of us are artists. I think that people have the urge to create. And I just want you to take a moment and think about the things that you make and that you create. I create things to make sense of a world that sometimes feels beautiful or magical, sometimes is disappointing, or sometimes is terrible. And I'm going to talk about how I arrived at this place of being an artist and some of the tools that I used to be an artist. I was in high school in the 1970s, and I was distracted by a lot of things outside of school, and I found it really difficult to focus on, in particular, reading, which is a very important tool for learning things in school. And so I enjoyed art classes, I enjoyed writing classes, but when it came time to think about going to college, I didn't think about going to art school, even though I did love my art classes, because I was worried about supporting myself and trying to figure out how could I make a living as an artist. So I decided to study English and had plans to become a journalist or some kind of writer. I wasn't quite sure. In the middle of college, after 2 years, I took a semester off to attend a black and white photo program in Maine for 3 months. And this was in 1981, before digital photography was a thing. And so I was studying analog photography, where I used actual film, went into the dark room and made prints there. And I loved making the images and then seeing the images emerge in the darkroom. And I loved the experience of creating a portfolio of work. But at the end, I thought, how can I make a living doing this? It wasn't clear to me. And you know, as someone who at 20 years old, you know, that's a consideration, and that might be something that you're thinking about when you finish high school, and how are you going to go out in the world and make a living? Because I think that taking care of ourselves financially is part of life. So I finished college, and I had a series of jobs that were decidedly not in journalism, and photography was always part of my consciousness. I would bring my camera around with me all the time and take pictures. But this was a time before everyone had a phone in their pocket and took pictures of everything. It was a different time, and I liked taking pictures because it was a way for me to document my experience and to show some of my ideas about the world. And all this while, you know, after college and having a series of jobs that were not that interesting to me, I always I couldn't shake the desire to take pictures. So I decided to move to New York City to work with commercial photographers in order to see if I could be a professional photographer. So I became a photographer's assistant, and I did that for 2 years. And I learned a lot about the photography business and a lot about photography in general. And my observations of the people that I worked with was that they were super confident, and I felt like I was not confident. And I just thought, how am I going to be able to do this if I don't have the confidence to do it? And so I thought, well, I need to figure out a way to make a living. I love the medium of photography, but I'm going to do this as a as a hobby. I'll be a fine arts photographer on the side. And I decided to become a teacher because I like kids. And even though I was not a great high school student, I had some really great teachers that made a difference in my life. So I said, okay, I can be a teacher. So I moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where I worked on getting certified to become a teacher, which I did. And I continued to try to get my work out in the world. When I did become a teacher in high school, that took up most of my emotional, physical, and intellectual bandwidth. And I stopped taking pictures. So this was in the 90s. And then I got married and I started raising a family. And this, combined with teaching, consumed all of my creative energy. Our home had a garden, so it was around this time that I started gardening seriously. I just want to say I didn't start as a great gardener, but gardening is like so many things. It's a skill that a person can develop through practice, just like drawing or gaming or basketball or cooking. You know, I think our culture promotes a misconception about talent versus effort. And the idea that certain people have special talents and they're the ones that are meant to be an athlete or an artist or a scientist. But my experience as a gardener and as a mother and as a teacher have all shown me that it's possible to develop one's skills through practice and through effort. And it's possible to learn how to do things that once seemed really out of reach. And I think this is one of the most helpful lessons that my life experience has taught me. So all these years I've been gardening and getting better and better at gardening through practice. Even though I've had plenty of failures, a lot of times I've learned much through those failures. I decided to experiment with growing mushrooms in some garden beds at my house. And I just want to, as an aside, I want to say that mushrooms grow through thread-like underground roots that are called mycelium. And I found a source from which I purchased some mycelium, and I prepared garden beds with this mycelium in April of 2015. And by September, mushrooms began popping up. And I have a little bit of experience foraging for mushrooms in the woods. And another aside I want to say is that if you're interested in learning more about foraging for mushrooms, I'm going to provide a link for groups in your area where you can go out into the woods with people, with a group, and they will share their information about and knowledge about mushrooms. Please do not do this by yourself, and please do not pick and eat mushrooms from, from the parks or the woods or someone's yard and eat them. Please do not do that without getting some knowledge. So I had some knowledge about mushrooms, and one tool that people use to identify mushrooms is called a spore print. This is when you take a mushroom and you put it with its gill side down on paper. So the cap is like this. And after several hours, the spores that are inside the gills of mushrooms, they're almost like tiny little seeds, they are released, and they fall on the paper, and they create usually a pattern like the gills. And also the color of those spores provides information about the type of mushroom that it is. So I did this with the first mushrooms that came up in my garden, and just to make sure that we could eat them and that they were the right mushrooms. And that spore print that I made, when I saw that, it totally blew my mind, and it made me think of the photography that I had sort of left behind. The image was photographic, but it had texture and color, and I thought, I want to do something with this. So that's what I've been doing ever since. So that was in September of 2015. And since then, I've been experimenting with mushroom spore prints. And the process sort of began really with some basic spore printing, and then it has evolved in where I experiment with different materials, different papers, and I sometimes use stencils, and I also started incorporating the cyanotype process into my work. And so that's what I'm here today to show you, is the cyanotype process and how you can use that yourself. Welcome to my studio. Let's compose a still life with glass. And in this case, I'm picking two glass items. One is a glass with some water in it. One is a little old honey jar that's pretty small. And I'm also going to use my eyeglasses, which I need until I put them down on the paper. So we're going to take the paper, and we're going to put the objects on this. And I'm going to turn this slightly. And I'm kind of interested in how this glass looks when it's like this. And then I'm also going to put my glasses down. And so we'll see the shadows and the reflections and how that comes out. Oops, this is slightly not even, but... And we're going to wait until the paper turns almost whitish, which will be a few minutes. So we'll come back in just a minute. In the places where the lightest is the most strong is where we're going to have the darkest blue. So I'm thinking that in these highlights where the sun is coming through and shining most brightly, those are going to be the darkest spots on this print. And you can see the paper's getting lighter, and so we'll wait just probably another 30 seconds, and then I'll bring it over to the sink and rinse it for just a minute. This paper is different than the paper that I coat, and the directions say just to rinse for 1 minute, so I'll show you how to do that. One thing I'm going to point out as I take this, you can see that what's left there. So I'm gonna now go over to the sink. So here I'm going to rinse this off for a minute, and you can see this is before rinsing it off. You can see the almost. They're like photographs. This is a photogram. These are like, versions of the glass, the jar, and the glasses. So, and my experience with this paper is that it will darken. So right now it might look really light, but as it dries, it'll darken. All right, so that's about a minute, and then I will hang it up to dry. For this next composition, I want you to take something familiar that you own. So it could be your earbuds. Obviously, I don't have the AirPod ones. Scissors. This is an earring that I really love. the capo if you play the guitar, anything that's not so large, and also a piece of waxed paper if you have it. If you don't have waxed paper, you could use some other piece of paper, but something that the light can go through. And if you don't have that, you don't even need to use the wax paper, but I'm gonna use the earbuds. And I'm just going to make a composition where I put this down on my cyanotype paper, and then I'm gonna put the wax paper over it so the light can come through and you can see the shadow here. And we're just gonna see how I can make an image of this that's a little bit different than what is usual. And if you want, you could just make an exposure like that. And the shadows that come down, those are the things that are going to be lighter. So I'm going to put my paper down and the wax paper over it and expose it. I want the ear parts kind of like this. I'm running out of time. It's doing its own thing. And I'm going to put this over it. And let's just see what happens with that. So just waiting for the blue to turn lighter, and then I'll rinse it in water. The paper looks almost white, so I'm going to take this out of the sun and process it.